Well, you all know it's the 24 hours of entrepreneurship, and it's time for the Power Minute. And I've got a gentleman that's going to talk to us today about entrepreneurship, something that's inherent in his makeup and part of who he is. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce to some and welcome to the broadcast, Dr. Michael V. Roberts. Mike, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm fantastic. Staying safe and staying distant.
Yes, I think we all are. And I'll tell you, when we say staying safe and staying distant, I think one of those words speaks to us as entrepreneurs and the other one doesn't. Entrepreneurs never play it safe. We're always gambling. We're always taking chances, always taking risks. But now sometimes we are distant because when we start out, a lot of times we start out as a solopreneur. We don't have a lot of people around us. We've got our vision and our idea, and then we take it from there. When you started out, was that something that or a condition that you really started in?
Well, you use the word risk, which is an important word in the space of entrepreneurship. You don't want to be risky. You want to have measured risk. In other words, you don't just necessarily blindly go out and try to accomplish things that you don't have somewhat of a feel for, or you're not at least academically prepared to handle and analyze. So, being an entrepreneur is a risk taker. There's no question about it, because you're usually delving into something that you or your family have never been engaged in the past. You perhaps read about it. You are trying to emulate someone that you've seen in the past. But at the end of the day, you are there alone. You are there with potential bankers who might be helping you, or investors. You're there facing, how are you going to move your business? So therefore, what would be the type of, how will you run your business? What are your best practices? And, who are your customers and your clients? And how will you market to them and be able to edge out potentially your competition? So there are a lot of, issues that goes through one's mind when they decide that they want to become an entrepreneur.
So now, as an entrepreneur, you have a vision, and you have to take that vision from idea to reality. And so therefore, you need a plan. Some people talk about the fact that they have a business plan, but there's a difference between a business plan and a strategic plan. A business plan is written for finance. A strategic plan is written primarily for action. Can you talk about the difference?
Yeah, I like to talk about it, but I'd like to talk about it in different terms.
Okay.
You see, I think that there's basically two things that you're endowed with. One is the capacity to learn. So therefore, when you develop a business plan and you create a model, it sort of becomes the roadmap. I mean, you wouldn't drive from my home in St. Louis to New Mexico without a map of some kind. You see, same thing is applicable in business. You usually have a business plan. Although I started many a business without a business plan, which leads me to the second component, and that is instinct. You can have empirical knowledge on one hand, but frequently it's your instinct, your gut, that inner voice that basically guides you into the possibility of being in business in a specific way. So I rely heavily on instinct as well as a model or plan. In an African-American community, we don't have a lot of, rich uncles who have been in business and we can go and talk to and seek advice and counsel. That's one of the reasons I wrote my two books, Action Has No Season and Action Is No Season 2.0, because providing those types of secrets and strategies that I learned throughout the process, I felt the only way to share that completely is to write a book about it. And therefore I've done that. And I want people to recognize that there are many possibilities that exist within them within yourself. And much of it has to do with your instinct to pull them out. That is an important component, in my opinion, of one's business direction.
So instinct and your ideology?
Instinct and empirical knowledge or education. In other words, well, how have you educated yourself, written a business plan, developed your model, done your research? All of those components are part of that empirical knowledge that you develop. And then when you take that, you have to blend who you are, what you're about. That's your instinct. I use that term because it is sort of a nondescript feeling that you have that allows you to make a decision. It's that thing that if you're walking down a dark street, something inside of you says, let me cross over and move in a different direction. I sense danger. I sense concern. So the question becomes, how do you sense business opportunity and then take your ideas and your thoughts and your dreams and then pursue them? You see, if you have those components, use them. Because business plans aren't necessarily correct for the time in which you introduce your business plan. The calculations may be off a little bit. You may have to realize that sometimes it's more important for you to be innovative and for you to take a direction and then create an alternative component to your direction that's not in writing. But you see it, you feel it, you understand it, and then you move in the direction that can be supportive of your game plan or the end of the plan.
Okay. So let's talk about your first book a little bit. And there are specific strategies that you've outlined and specific principles that you've outlined in the book. Can you talk a little bit about the flow and the principles that you have? I mean, you just talked about two of them in the beginning, but I know there's quite a few more as you move through the entrepreneurial process.
Well, sure. I mean, throughout my book, I have both indicated the philosophy at the time and the type of direction I believed that I needed to go in. And I wrote in the book the anecdotal support of the results of those directions in the different businesses. So I built over 100 businesses with my brother Steve and I, and each one were different. I mean, we've owned over, I think it was 12 TV stations, full power TV stations. We owned a radio station. We still own the radio station in Jackson, Mississippi. We've owned about 14 hotels, and we built a wireless phone company. So you might ask, well, how does all that intersect? Well, basically, what intersects is who you are and what you're about and your level of courage to pursue it. So my first book, I coined the term the actionaire, and that's one who takes their ideas, their dreams, their vision, and their passion, and they pursue them with courage and with confidence and bravado. As I've always indicated, we all have dreams.
Mm-hmm.
What's the first thing you have to do when you have a dream? You have to wake up. Then you have to sit up, and then you have to stand up, and then you have to prosecute your dreams. And unfortunately, in our families, in African-American families, sometimes there's always the naysayers who will suggest you get a job and don't go into business because, you know, Uncle Tyrone tried it and that didn't work out. Well, as I've said many times, after you wake up, sit up, and stand up, you have to tell your family members or friends to shut up and get out of your way, because you have to go after this. You have to pursue this. No one else is going to pursue your dream but you. And therefore, you know, in my book, I try to build a philosophy of of more existentialism, recognizing that every day when you wake up, you're given 86,400 seconds, and at the moment in which you even think of the moment, it's already gone. So I also refer to the concept of what would your life be like if you could eliminate the fear of failure in business. First word, fear. I always describe fear as being a mental construct. It's not of nature. You know, it's not the grass growing or snow blowing. It's in your mind. In fact, when you were born, God made you perfect. And it wasn't until later in your life that you decided, you know, to be fearful of things. Well, I submit to you, you can eliminate that. You don't have to have that in your mind any longer. And the second word, failure, I make the argument that failure really doesn't exist and should never exist in your mind, because look, there are times when things don't work out. Sure, in a business they don't work out. In some cases, marriages don't work out. Friendships don't work out. However, would you define that as a failure, or would you find that as an experience where the outcome wasn't as you would have liked, but you learned from it? You gained from it. So it wasn't a failure. So we need to eliminate that and position ourselves to eliminate the fear of failure, because that's what throws a lot of those of us who are entrepreneurs off, because we fear that it's not going to make it for one reason or another, when in fact, the only way that you'll ever know is to pursue it. And as I said earlier, you're given 86,400 seconds. That's 24 hours for those math majors out there. And every second that you are in it, you either use it or you lose it. So I submit to you, go for it. I mean, the reason I built all of these companies was because as an actionaire, I take the position that, you know, I've eliminated the fear of failure. I've also been very mindful that words play different games in the minds of people. Right. For example, if I ask the audience, you know, how many of you think outside the box, raise your hand, you know, probably most people will raise their hand. And then I would spank them. I would do that because if you're telling me that you think outside the box, doesn't that presume that you are in a box? So the question becomes, what's the size of your box? And really the big, broader question is, well, who are you anyway? Who are you? And you need to ask that of yourself. You know, I know it's a metaphor, it's sort of it's a play on words, but words can play havoc in your mind. So my position is, and the actionaire's position is, there's no such thing as a box in the first place. There's only the horizon. It doesn't exist. So therefore, you're not thinking outside of anything. You're thinking globally. You're becoming more international. You don't see yourself as just being able to build a business on the corner of where you live, but instead on the corner of the globe in which you exist.
You know, it's interesting. You talk about the box, and the box is usually because of paradigms that have been created based on the exposure of generations after generations after generations. One of the big things that we talk about now is building generational wealth. Yeah. And allowing the next generation to capitalize on the wealth that was built by the previous generation. That's something in our community that has lacked for many years. When you're working with people to try to get them to understand that you're doing something that may be outside of the box from their perspective because you're not looking at the box, how do you communicate that to the other people in your circle so that they understand where you're going and what you're trying to do?
Well, I'm not sure that you have to, first of all, okay, because they are in a box. It's a mental state, first of all, that limits them, and therefore, you know, when you go out to pursue your endeavors, you know, they're busy thinking, well, how is it that he or she are doing these things? You know, we all went to public schools together. I went to public schools. I went on to law school. I studied international law at the World Court. I've been able to travel throughout the world. But my daddy worked at the post office for 39 years. So we weren't rich, we weren't poor, we just never had any money. I think a few people understand that scenario. Mm-hmm. So how do you develop wealth? Well, first of all, you recognize that there's a thing called a wealth gap. and that wealthy people, when they wake up in the morning, especially uh, white folks, do you think they're thinking about black folks? No, they're thinking about their families and how they're going to develop and increase their wealth. Uh, I believe wealth is important. The reason I've developed wealth, and I'm trying to make it as sustainable as possible for my children, uh, is is something that is pretty special. I often say that probably some of you viewers right now have never heard of the Roberts brothers in St. Louis, Mike and Steve Roberts, uh, but it's primarily because rich people scream, but wealthy people whisper. And so there are a lot of us who are becoming wealthy. My hopes are that they are taking the time to also develop how the next generation will be properly educated and understand how to sustain it so that their children and their children's children will be able to continue to grow off of the successes that I made, and we can see that continue on. There's nothing more important than that. You might ask the question, well, how are you doing that with your kids? Well, first of all, I want to make sure all my 4 children were well educated. I had 2 to go to Morehouse to Spelman. They were twins. Another one to USC and one to Pepperdine. But all 4 of them graduated from Pepperdine Law School. So they are academically prepared to do whatever they need to do. That's one of the things that a parent, if nothing else, can achieve, hopefully, and that is to provide their children with as much understanding of the system through education. Now, fortunately, they are involved with me one way or another in my businesses. They tutor under me in a sense. They work with me, and they're good people. So, as I always tell people out there, don't judge me on the hundreds of millions I may have made, but judge me on how I'm raising my babies. Because that is what the entrepreneur has to recognize, that it's not just about them and what they're doing. It's about how do they close the wealth gap by creating wealth and then making it sustainable for those who come by. And it may be, if you don't have a family of children, it may be even your employees being able to provide the type of relationships where they can also be able to sustain and develop wealth as a result of your teachings.
And I need you to go back to this, because it's a powerful statement, and I just can't let it go by without digging into it for a few minutes.
Sure.
Rich people yell, but wealthy people whisper. I often heard and learned in economics about the difference between wealthy people and what wealthy people call the nouveau riche. A lot of people don't get that concept. Can you talk about that concept for a little bit? Because it's prevalent in our society that we have a lot of people who become rich and they want everybody to see it, but the wealthy don't.
Well, it can be summed up this way. There's something strange and unusual when you see a person driving a Land Rover, but they have a landlord. We see folks bling bling, gold around their fingers, their toes, their nose, and they don't have $20 in their pocket. We see we for whatever reason, and I think we all know, we look at celebrities, and we look at celebrities primarily as entertainers or athletes.
Right.
When in fact, in the world of the true entrepreneurial world, or even if you look at American history, if you look at Black history, we don't see the 40, 50, 60,000 successful Black people that have been incredibly successful in business for over the last 100 years. But if you read American history, right there blended into the American history annals is, Ford and Rockefeller, Mellon, Carnegie. They are just robber barons and successful business people and capitalists, they're actually written into the history books as a part of history.
Mm-hmm.
If you go to read Black history, you know, all you're going to see are things relating to, you know, civil rights and slavery and things along that line. We're not blending all of the history of Black capitalism that existed for the last 150 years as part of Black history. And also, I found this to be the case, and I've spoken at many HBCUs and also at Harvard and other white schools, that if I ask that question, well, in your Black history, you know, how much of that relates to the history of entrepreneurship, to the kids that are learning this way? Or if I go to the business schools and I ask, if you are teaching 100 case studies, how many of those case studies are African American? And interestingly enough, it's only one or two maybe. And then they'll say, well, but we don't know, you know, how to find it. I said, wait a minute. Black Enterprise for 45 years or so has been listing the 100 top Black businesses in a variety of fields. All of those could be case studies. Whether they're in business today or not in business today, those are case studies, right? And so to me, there's a different experience for Black entrepreneurs and white entrepreneurs. We have to recognize that. And we recognize that first and foremost, even when we go to the banks for financing. You know, there's a dichotomy there that is unfortunate, and it allows for that wealth gap to sustain itself. So, you know, I'm a firm believer in making sure that we have as much information about the success stories in the African American community as we can, because that is what our young people and people of all ages who are interested in becoming entrepreneurs can emulate. If we don't have examples, it's very difficult for us to move to the next level.
Yeah, well, that's very true. I mean, as you said, a lot of times we have been either undereducated or remiss in our thirst for the knowledge of some of these entrepreneurs. I mean, recent entrepreneurs as well as dating back to the post-slavery days, and you know, the people like Lawrence Lattimore and people like Charles Drew and other people like that, Madam C.J. Walker. You know, we know the Madam C.J. Walker story because it's come more into focus. But the Lawrence Lattimore story and even the Dr. Charles Drew story,
Yeah.
these are not things that are prevalent. So as you talk to the younger generations, how do you key them in to focusing on that historical wealth perspective of our community?
That's a good question. A few months ago, I was in White Plains, New York, speaking to over 300 young Kappa leaguers. My fraternity, Kappa Alpha Psi, has an outreach all over the country to young people, and these are high schoolers. And one of my messages to them is to really take the time to recognize that you have a lot of ingenuity and you have innovation within you. And in today's world, it's not going to be traditional jobs as we know it coming up over the next 5 or 10, 20 years. That as a result of artificial intelligence, machine learning, robotics, the blockchain, and even the direction in which we're looking at how to define currency from a cryptocurrency perspective, that all of these are the things that these young people understand to some degree, but I was trying to get them to drill down further into understanding what this really means, you know, and by doing that, they could be more innovative. Gaming, for example, is a $150 billion business last year alone, and it's going to be one of the future businesses. In fact, it'll also be played in casinos because it'll be gaming and gambling connected to it. A lot of the so-called celebrities are creating teams. In fact, it may even be an Olympic sport someday.
Wow.
So I'm a futurist. One of the reasons I've done so many deals outside of what most people would have attempted to do, such as building a digital wireless phone company. When my brother and I built that, we're the only blacks in history to have ever built and owned our own phone company at a time when the digital age was developing. So I try to get the young people to kind of shy away from some of the more traditional jobs that people are teaching them in school to go toward, but to be much more innovative and challenge the system, be disruptive in a sense. And I don't mean disruptive in a negative sense. I mean, recognize that this world is disruptive, is being disrupted. Now, even if you look at the situation with the virus that's out here now, COVID-19 has disrupted the entire globe. Everything is going to change in so many ways. Now, how do we as entrepreneurs plan to make money on this? What are we going to do? How innovative are we going to be when we look at, the way things are going to operate in the future? I made the argument that by 2035, more than half of the jobs that African Americans and most people out here currently have will not exist anymore. Any job that requires repetitiveness will be taken over by robotics and artificial intelligence and machine learning. So what we have to do now, and the younger people have to recognize that that's going to be the case. So where will you fit in terms of new business opportunities? What's going to evolve? And I want you to be a part of that evolution. I also told them, and these are high school kids, I said, well, if you know a 2-year-old, I said, by the time they're your age, and many of you are approaching 16, and you're learning to drive, by the time they come along, they will not know how to drive a car. They will command a car. Because by that time, all the cars probably on the road will be autonomous. So there's just this, we are right in the middle of these changes that are taking place around us. And too many people are still sleeping. And as I said, you got to wake up to your dreams, and you've got to become well-read. So in my last book that I wrote, Action Has No Season 2.0, I did 2 extensive chapters on artificial intelligence, the future business opportunities, machine learning and robotics. And then I did a chapter on the whole concept of what is currency today and what will currency be in the future. Specifically, how do we play in the world of cryptocurrency and blockchain? Every municipality in the world will have to convert all of their data into a blockchain scenario. How do you prepare yourself for that? And look at the many business opportunities that will come from that. So the future is here, and these things are real. So I'm constantly speaking on this subject and hoping people will listen and wake up to the business opportunities that are right here in front of us.
So obviously, science and technology are the way of the future, and they're taking us into the futuristic concepts. Are there specific areas in the science and technology world that you would recommend for young people to really start to delve into and familiarize themselves with so they're ready for the new changes?
Absolutely. I mean, there's many, all of the ones I just described are part of the business opportunities. Artificial intelligence, here's an example of what's going to happen in the future. These nanochips are going to be placed inside of your body. And those nanochips are going to be able to determine your health condition. It'll measure your blood pressure, it'll measure your cholesterol, etc. Should you have a problem, this nanochip will send a signal to the RoboDoc that is connected to you. That RoboDoc will prescribe some type of solution or medicine to bring down, for example, say your blood pressure. That RoboDoc will then send notice to the robo-pharmacist, who will then take that prescription and fill it, and then they'll call the local robo drone company to deliver it to your house. Now, I've just eliminated doctors, pharmacists, and Uber Eats type people, because these types of future plans are more than just plans. They're actually beginning to exist now. Now, all the way through everything I just described are business opportunities. I mean, all of those elements have to be programmed. They have to be repaired. They have to be capable to perform with precision. And so there needs to be humans to do that. One thing about robotics is that robots can't do what humans do. I mean, robots can't love, they can't hate, they can't, they're not creative. You know, they can only do what they're sort of programmed to do. But we're seeing that the speed in which all that is taking place is incredible, and it's moving so fast. You know, I could lecture for a while on how some of these things are moving quickly, but in the interest of time, I just want to suggest that if folks will take the time to look into and read a little bit about what futurists are saying, you know, and what they're thinking, and begin to think the same way, that they'll be able to start to carve out some entrepreneurial opportunities.
Well, you know, the STEM programs in our schools are really taking a lot of priority, as they should. And when you talk about robotics, it's very interesting. The the people in the back that are programming the robots are the computer technicians or the computer analysts and experts. Those are the people that you're talking about are going to really shape the future. Am I correct?
Oh, you're absolutely correct. And by shaping the future, they're shaping your lifestyle, ostensibly. So these things are going to make a major shift in our society. And I think this coronavirus is a good example of seeing how fragile we are here on Earth. That at any point in time, you know, if we're not being mindful of how each of us must work together to protect each other, this is a good example of that. You know, I often ask the question, you know, today, what's the difference between an icon and a hero? Between an icon, a person who's an icon, and a person who's a hero. Because usually in our society in the past, we've always looked toward heroes. And it's hard to define today what is a hero. Of course, we know the doctors and the nurses and those who are at the moment out front doing that, we're calling them heroes. But who is, you know, who are the heroes in the African American community in the past? Now there's icons. Oprah is an icon, and there are folks that we consider famous because of what they've done and how they've accomplished things, and I call them icons. But I'm trying to really help us get around this concept of who are the heroes. Why? Because we emulate heroes. We generally try to embrace and say, hey, listen, you know, I want my child to grow up and be, you know, president of the United States just the way Barack Obama did it. Yeah. A form of hero, if you will. We've seen other types of heroes. Are there going to be some new heroes that's going to surface in the Black community? And if they are, might they actually be entrepreneurs and business people, successful capitalists who understand the importance of social capitalism? In other words, being able to be a capitalist, but at the same time have a social consciousness to do some of the right things. And then if that is the case, and I think we should develop that, the more we can embrace and make heroes out of business people, the more likely we're going to have young people to come along and say, that's my hero. I want to be just like him. I don't want to be just like her, and become entrepreneurs and go out here and make a difference.
Well, you talk about heroes, and you mentioned Barack Obama, and the list. I mean, I guess one of the places we need to start is to really start to formulate that kind of a list, because as we said in an earlier stage of the conversation, there's a lot of people who just aren't cognizant of people that are out there making a difference. I was fortunate enough that we met about 10 years ago, and I got to know who Mike Roberts was. Now, I know I'm putting you on the spot, and I might embarrass you a little bit, but the accomplishments of the Roberts Company are are mega to our community. So we have a basis or a jump off point or an example of what it means to be on the cutting edge or be out in front of things. If you had to give us a list of a couple more that we could share with the audience, who would they be?
Success stories, you mean? Is that what you're saying? Business success stories?
Yes.
Uh-huh. Well, there are many, and most of them are, it's like politics. Politics, when it's all said and done, is local, right? In other words, I used to be an elected official. I was a city councilman in St. Louis.
Mm-hmm.
So just like politics is local, heroes are local, business people are local heroes. And so, we would have to go city by city and begin to pull out those success stories and raise them up as a hero. You see, the way the system is working, if you look at TV and news, the news isn't about which business people have succeeded in the community and having great stories about them locally. The news is whatever bleeds leads. So they're more interested in who shot somebody and what's happening in the criminal side of life,
Right.
opposed to emphasizing it. So I think part of our challenge now is to take the local leaders, turn them into heroes who are in business. So instead of trying to, I sometimes am bothered by the concept of white folks saying, well, who's the black leader now? Well, my question, well, who's the white leader now?
There are many.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, it's so, and if you really start talking to them about leadership, they're going to talk about who's heading up the corporate 100 companies.
Right.
They're going to say, people like, are people like Mark Cuban or Bezos or some of the other, those who are at the top of the feeding levels that have succeeded in business, and for whatever reason, they go to them. The news people will go to them for information and data, whereas for us, they'll go to somebody who's on the civil rights side of things, which is
right.
Which is traditional, and therefore continues to keep us in a position where it's more about that. As we always say, it's more about the civil rights movement, SILVER rights movement versus the civil rights movement. So I say to you, not to duck the question of who I think, because there's several, more so for people in the community who's watching, to begin to identify and lift those business people, those people who are employing people, and let that be let that be our mantra going forward, because that becomes our heroes. Those are our heroes.
Fantastic. Well,
we need to tell their story.
I'm sorry?
I was just saying that needs to be our story.
I agree wholeheartedly. Yeah. It's interesting as I think about it, and when you were sitting here, I just mentioned the name of one of our deceased, but most of it in our community, until they become global icons, you really don't hear about them. like you said, the local heroes don't get the press, they don't get the prestige until they become a global icon. We lost Reginald Lewis with Beatrice Foods, Earl Graves. You've got Oprah Winfrey and people of that nature that are global icons. But we really need, as you said, to drill down into the local community and raise up some of those people that are doing the things that you're talking about. If there's something in closing that you'd like to leave for people to think about, to take them through the end of this situation into the new normal, what would that be, Mike?
Well, everyone is supposed to be receiving $1,200, right, as part of the stimulus. And so the question then becomes, what are you going to do with that money? So I'm going to pitch to you probably 4 ideas I have thought through, because when you really put the numbers, if you think about it, if there's 30 million African Americans, or more, it's actually more like 40. But even if you just take the 20 million African Americans, all of whom will receive at the same time $1,200, if you want to do the math, look at what that translates into. 20 million receiving $1,250. So that's somewhere there about $20 billion, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hitting our Black community. Now, how fast is it going to turn over, and what is it going to do? Or is it going to come in and leave, within 6 hours or within 2 days? How do we use that money and turn it around into making an individual a little more successful? Well, the first thing I would do is I would encourage people to write down and pay off their credit cards with it. Why? Because the credit cards are going to hit them on the back end, and their interest rates are very, very high. Paying off your credit card doesn't mean that you're losing the money. It just means you have shifted it into your credit card. You've eliminated the interest accruing on you, and now you're saving money on the back end. And so therefore, that would be one of the first things I would do. I would also look at the possibility of investing in the stock market. As the stock market is lower now, but look at blue chip companies where there's a good management company of management people at the top. They have a good model, and they should be paying dividends. Those are solid companies. Maybe diversify your portfolio with a little stock. Also look at some real estate, and there will be, I'm sure, similar to 08, 09, where there'll be some properties that are probably going to be lost by people through foreclosures and through as a result of people not being able to pay their mortgages and so on and so forth. So maybe a little money on the real estate side is a smart move. And finally, something that I don't think enough of us recognize or embrace, and that is taking a look at investing in Bitcoin, the cryptocurrency. The swings with that tremendous, and in terms of the valuation, it is not as risky as people think. You may not completely understand cryptocurrency and the Bitcoin, but in the future, I predict that will be the most global universal currency that will exist. Today, you can see that America is just printing money. It's called fiat money. It's fake. But because we place a value on it, it'll work. But historically, over time, different types of currencies have fallen short because they didn't necessarily support the paper they were written on. And so we see that in a lot of foreign countries. 70% of the world is based on the US dollar in terms of its currency. So if it begins to drift, then everybody's going to have some problems in terms of inflation and issues like that. Now, the one thing about the Bitcoin cryptocurrency, it is global, it is accepted, and it stays the same. The valuation goes up and down, but there was only 23 million of those coins created. And remember, it's not a coin, it is a number, and you can take percentages of a coin, just like you take percentages of a dollar, you know, pennies, nickels, and so on and so forth, to make a dollar. So as it grows, I mean, there are those who predict that one Bitcoin alone, you know, may be worth, well, it was up to $19,000 2 years ago. It's in the $6,000 or $7,000 range these days, but it'll shift. It'll go down and come back up. But once all this settles, something like that could be worth $100,000. Some argue that one could be worth $1 million.
Wow.
So it is a very interesting scenario in the future to see how blockchain allows us to do business in a trusted way, in a peer-to-peer way, which will ultimately eliminate lawyers. And if you're going to buy some property, for example, it will eliminate bankers, and it will eliminate title holders, because the data that's inside of a blockchain is immutable, meaning it cannot be hacked. It will describe your property that you may be buying, even if you're buying it in Singapore. It will tell you the entire history of it, and you'll know exactly what you're buying. And then you have a peer-to-peer exchange. I send my percentage of Bitcoin to the people who are receiving it. That's going to be done through our wallet, which is our phone. And as a result, we're going to see a whole different type of wealth development. And that is how ultimately the wealth gap can close, because we'll be able to utilize a currency that's global in nature. And if we grow it now, and invest in it now, in the future, it will have tremendous value long term. So, sorry, again, you know, being kind of an entrepreneurial futurist type person, you know, I look at all of these things that are coming up, and sometimes start to create my own thoughts on them, of course. And like I said, I've thrown them in both of my books. So anyone who's interested, you know, I would like for you to first try to buy it at a black bookstore. And if you can't get it there, they're certainly on Amazon. All they have to do is just type in my name, Michael B. Roberts, or the book title, Action Has No Season, and Action Has No Season 2.0.
Fantastic. Well, Mike, I know you're a busy guy, and it's always a pleasure to spend time with you. And I know the folks here on the 24 Hour of Entrepreneurship are really going to appreciate the information that you've shared today. And as always, my friend, you know, I look up to you and I admire what you've done and respect what you've done. And one day we're going to sit down and I'm going to say, you know what, Mike? I learned from your lessons that you shared.
Thank you very much. And let me just say to you, we appreciate what you're doing for our community by doing this. And as one of my fellow fraternity friends, you being an Omega, me being a Kappa, we have a number of folks out here who recognize that our fraternities are doing some great works in the community. And I think people need to recognize the good works that's going on by so many people. And let's begin to identify our heroes, and let's embrace them, and then let's let our kids emulate them. And that's how we'll begin to see the changes take place.
Absolutely. All right. Well, there you have it, folks. A little time with Dr. Michael B. Roberts. It's always a great time with a great exchange of information. And that's all the time we have, and we wish you the best.